Have you ever skipped a workout because you couldn't do the right one? No time for the gym, no time for a long hike or bike ride. Well, here's the evidence-based news. You don't need to exercise 3 to 4 times per week. Short bursts of effort count, and for most exercise under an hour, don't worry too much about hydration. Well, welcome, my dear listeners, to episode number 72. The exercise rules you're allowed to break. Be a weekend warrior. Do short bursts of effort during your day, and don't fall for the hydration hype. I want to begin with an idea often attributed to Voltaire. The great is the enemy of the good. Now, that line applies really well to exercise. Many of us carry around an image of what the right workout plan is supposed to look like. It happens several days a week. It has the right mix of easier aerobic work and harder efforts, and it's supported by a hydration or fueling strategy. Sounds good, but life may not give you the time or the energy to do that. Is it a lost cause? Are you destined to poor health? Or are there exercise rules that we hear a lot but really can be broken? Where the evidence suggests that what may be doable actually gives you the benefit you wish. Well, let's find out. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Jeffrey Sankoff, an ER physician, a very successful Ironman triathlete, triathlon coach, and host of his own evidence-focused podcast for triathletes called The Tri-Doc. It's great. You'll enjoy it. We're kindred souls, both interested in what the evidence tells us does or doesn't work. His podcast focuses on endurance athletes who do triathlons. Today, though, we're focused on you, folks that care about their health, but also have a lot of other parts of their life tugging at them. No need to be an endurance athlete here. Welcome, Jeff, to Live Long and Well. Anything you want to share with folks as we begin?
Gosh, no, that was a great opening, and thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed listening to your evidence-based take on things, and I know I like the idea that we're kindred spirits, because I think we are. I think we are very much aligned in the way we view the world and the way we try to cut through all of the hype of that is, like you say, tugging at people to do things that may not always be in their best interests.
Well, and I describe myself as an open-minded skeptic, and I think you are too. I think most of the things that you dive into, whether it's creatine or, some latest recovery device, I don't think you care whether it works or it doesn't work. You just want to look at the evidence and share what you find with folks, which is really the nature of this whole podcast.
Yeah, agreed. I think that more often than not, I'm coming at things with this idea, look, if I could find something that works, great. I'm happy to share that. I'm happy to take advantage of it myself. But too often the hype is just outpacing the reality. And but again, like you said, an open-minded skeptic, always willing to learn, always willing to be proven wrong in my doubts. And occasionally that's the case.
That's the way it is. All right, before we dive in, here are the 3 take-home messages. Now, I always worry about whether I should put them in or not, because people will listen and they'll be like, well, Dr. Bobby, that was wonderful. Now I get to save another 20 minutes. But here's the teaser. We're just going to give you the headline. We're not going to kind of tell you yet how to deal with it or how to do it. But take-home messages. First, if your weekdays are impossible, then be a weekend warrior and do your exercise on Saturday and Sunday. Second, intensity doesn't have to be a formal interval workout. It can actually seamlessly fit into your day if you look for opportunities, and they're there. Third, for most workouts under an hour, hydration and fueling aren't necessary. Now, in a few minutes, Jeff and I will explain how to break these rules. So the theme for today is don't let the great become the enemy of the good. You can enjoy your exercise on your time and how it works for you. Now, we'll have 3 parts to our exercise discussion. One about each rule that you can break. And for each section, I'll set up the rule. I'll introduce the study where evidence supports that approach. Dr. Sankoff will walk us through the study results and what they mean. Then I'll come back and mention a few study limitations, because a good headline is not the same as proof. Part 1, let's break the calendar rule. Rule number 1, you need to exercise throughout the week. The first rule is about timing. Most exercise gurus tell us to exercise throughout the week. And, that makes sense. Regular exercise can help build habits, and it gives us recovery time. But real life may not make that possible. Work gets busy, travel interferes, family responsibilities take over. You may find that the only realistic window is the weekend. So the practical question is not whether weekend exercise is perfect. The question is, if the weekend is what life gives you, does it still count? And does the evidence support you breaking the calendar rule? Now, this is Voltaire's warning in its most common form. The great exercise approach might be a perfectly distributed weekly routine. The good might be Saturday and Sunday. And good turns out to be good enough. The key study here is the 2024 paper, Associations of Weekend Warrior Physical Activity with Incident Disease and Cardiometabolic Health. So it examined 60,000 participants in the UK Biobank, a longitudinal observational study that's frankly been used many, many times. Okay, in this study, the participants wore a Fitbit or other accelerometer for a week. The average age was about 62, and the researchers classified participants as inactive, regularly active, or weekend warriors. And weekend warriors did their weekly moderate to vigorous activity during 1 or 2 days. The investigators then tested whether exercisers in general and weekend warriors in specific got health benefits after about 5 years, looking at several hundred medical conditions. So, Jeff, what did they find, and how should listeners interpret this? How did folks do in general with exercise, and what about those weekend warriors?
Yeah, it's particularly interesting that I think this research found that both the active and weekend warrior groups did pretty well, certainly compared to the inactive groups. Now, that might come across as a little bit surprising for people. They may think that, oh, if I'm only exercising 2 days a week, that can possibly be as good as exercising every day. And I'm not sure that that's what the take-home point is. But the take-home point here is that being a weekend warrior, somebody who's exercising at least a couple of days a week, is significantly better than doing nothing. And this is backed up by a lot of research that has shown something similar. We know that being sedentary increases your cardiovascular risk, and doing any kind of exercise will progressively decrease your cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. There is a tipping point at which doing too much can actually reverse some of those gains. So there's almost this thought that, look, being a weekend warrior might actually be a little bit protective because you're not getting to that tipping point. But this paper in particular, the 2024 paper, found that that weekend warriors definitely had lower risk for a lot of disease types, not just cardiovascular, than inactive people. And again, it just goes to show how being sedentary is so particularly not good, not well suited for a healthy, long life. These benefits were especially notable for heart-related conditions, including hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and sleep apnea, which is not terribly surprising. And the practical message here is not just that weekend-only exercise is the best possible plan, but rather that just getting some kind of activity, even if you have to do it in a concentrated fashion, remains better than not doing anything at all. And that, again, harkens back to all of the research we've seen over several decades now that just shows that being active in some capacity is protective.
I totally agree. I mean, my read of the data, and I'll get into some limitations in just a second, is, if you're going to do 2 to 4 hours of exercise, doing it every other day is great. But having the same number of minutes on the weekend, which fits into some people's lives better, it's clearly wasn't obviously inferior. That they both got a lot of benefit. And I love the Voltaire quote because life happens, and it's just, we need to figure out a balance that we can sustain. Now,
I do think,
go ahead.
I do think there are some, not downsides, but I do think there are some things that are not captured by this study. Like, for example, we know that exercise improves mental outlook and improves mental health. It improves our well-being in a lot of ways that are not necessarily measured in this study. And if we can find the ability to exercise on a daily basis, all of those other things can improve just as much as our measurable health metrics can. So while I think that the take-home message here should be, don't feel bad if you can only exercise on the weekend, we should get away from this idea that, it's okay to only exercise on the weekend. I think we should still encourage people that if they have the time, if they have the wherewithal, being able to exercise more than just on the weekend is still on balance better than doing it just on the weekend. But again, if you only have the weekends, then by all means, don't feel like you're not getting benefit, because you are.
And this wasn't a perfect study. It wasn't a randomized prospective study. It was an observational study where they looked at Fitbit data for a week and then projected forward 5 years to see how people did. And what they did 5 years ago for 1 week doesn't necessarily predict what they did the next week and the next week and the next year and the next year. So one always has to sort of wonder about studies like this. But it's important to just take this as what we know. So here's a question for you, Jeff. Okay, so let's just posit that doing the weekend warrior routine is, for your heart and other things, might be just as good or close to just as good. What do you think about injury issues? If you're sort of concentrating your exercise in 2 days and not necessarily letting your bones and joints recover, have you found, you're the perfect person because you're both a coach, so you're working with people, and you're in the ER, so you get the end result of when things don't go right. So what do you think about kind of the physical downsides of that concentrated weekend warrior?
So it really depends on what kinds of activities people are doing. It used to be thought that recreational athletes who concentrated their moderate to vigorous physical activities onto the weekends were higher risk for musculoskeletal and potentially even cardiovascular problems. But there's been some larger studies, observational still, but pretty large in 2023 and 2024 that came out that kind of suggested that the musculoskeletal injury risk might not be as high as traditionally feared, which is reassuring. And it makes a lot of sense that you would be more at risk of injuries because, like you said, if you don't get that physical adaptation that you get from training regularly and you just go out on the weekend and you suddenly play a hard game of tennis or play softball or whatever it is that you're doing, and you haven't really trained up to be able to do that, it makes sense that you could be exposed to the potential for these kinds of injuries. That doesn't seem to be bearing out quite as much as we once thought. So that is reassuring, but it's not to say that it doesn't exist at all. So it is still there. The cardiovascular thing is an issue, though. So when you go out and do a high intensity, stressful kind of exercise, so hockey is a great example. I grew up playing hockey, and when I was still living in Montreal, there was the home of my beloved Canadiens, who are into the third round of the playoffs after a dramatic Game 7 victory. I can't help but give a plug to my beloved Habs. Anyways, I played hockey, and I was playing old-timer hockey. My brother plays old-timer hockey, and he does not train regularly, but he goes out and he plays, and when he plays at a very high-level intensity. So he's really raising his heart rate, he's really raising his blood pressure, and we know that it is not uncommon in those kinds of situations, if you're not regularly trained, that when you spike your heart rate, you spike your blood pressure at that, you do put yourself at risk for a sudden cardiac type of event. It doesn't have to be cardiac arrest, but it could be ischemia to the heart. So there are those risks. They do exist. They are real. And so again, it comes down to what are you doing? If your weekend warrior type activity is going out and hiking at a low threshold level, if it's going out playing softball, if it's going out and golfing, walking instead of using the cart, those kinds of things, you're not pushing your cardiovascular system to a level that you're not trained for. Whereas if you go out and do something like play hockey, run at a high intensity, those kinds of things, you are potentially putting not just your musculoskeletal system, but also your cardiovascular system at a little more risk. And it is something you have to consider. So that's really the big thing. I think that we do need to consider overall that it's still beneficial, that you can mitigate these things by just being aware and knowing about it. And again, if you can work in some training during the week, especially in season of these things. So my brother plays hockey during the winter. So if he can ramp up some training leading into the winter to make sure his cardiovascular system is ready for those stresses, then he lowers his likelihood of having problems. So that's the kind of advice I give.
So you brought up the intensity issue, and that's exactly where we're about to head. But let me just sort of summarize the takeaway for breaking rule 1, the calendar. So here's what I think. If weekends are impossible, weekdays are impossible, weekends still count. Don't let the great become the enemy of the good. All right, now we're ready for part 2. Let's break the formal interval rule. So rule 2 is that high-intensity intervals need to be hard, structured, and planned. The second rule is about intensity. So for many people, including me, high intensity sounds like a formal workout, a gym class, a bike trainer, a coach, a timer, a heart rate target, maybe 3 minutes hard, 3 minutes easy, repeated until you're exhausted. Well, that kind of workout can be valuable, but it's also not a lot of fun. And for a competitive athlete, that might be the right approach. But for everyday health, intensity may not need to be so formal. And it could be a lot more fun. So a short burst of effort can happen in normal life. You climb the stairs with purpose. You carry heavy grocery bags quickly. You chase your son or grandson across the yard. You power up a hill on a walk. And none of that feels like a training session. But the question is, does it help me live long and well? Is there evidence to support breaking the intensity rule? And of course, we have evidence. So the key study is the 2026 European Heart Journal paper, Volume versus Intensity of Physical Activity and Risk of Cardiovascular and Non-Cardiovascular Chronic Diseases. Now, this prospective cohort study used pretty much the same folks in the prior study, those 60,000 biobank folks who wore the Fitbit, plus a larger group that had some self-reported physical activity. Now, the researchers looked not only at total physical activity volume, but also the percentage of activity that was considered vigorous. And then the outcomes included cardiovascular disease, diabetes, liver problems, inflammatory disorders, and dementia. So, Jeff, what did they find? And should people hear this as join a HIIT class, or can they look for short, vigorous efforts when life gives you the chance?
Yeah, I found this paper interesting. I have to say that I'm not entirely sure how to take it exactly because it seems almost a little too good to be true. But we've seen
Well,
an
we'll tell
increasing.
the audience why it's what the exciting is, and then we
Yeah.
can sort of come back and say why maybe it's not true.
Yeah, well, we've seen an increasing body of evidence over, again, the last decade or so that shows that high intensity interval training is really beneficial across age groups. And it's beneficial to people like me who are doing long distance events, who are training on a regular basis. But it's also very useful for people who train much less frequently and who have different kinds of goals. We know that just getting your heart rate up into a higher zone for a short period of time has enormous benefits, and that you don't have to keep it up that high for an entirely, long workout, but just doing it in these intervals, as you mentioned. And so this paper, retrospective again, observational, a lot of self-reporting, but basically found that people who had a higher proportion of vigorous activity had lower risks across multiple outcomes. And it didn't have to be a huge amount, like you said. Just getting 4% of your activity as vigorous made a big difference. And that activity didn't have to be formal intervals in gym sessions. It didn't have to be part of a bike ride where you were just suddenly doing sprints. No, it could be a few minutes a day, up to 20 minutes, as little as 20 minutes per week. And it could be doing the things that you mentioned. It could just be sprinting up some stairs. It could just be going up a hill during your walk, but really with purpose. The point is, though, you got to get your heart rate up. You've got to make sure that you're actually moving into a high intensity zone of perceived effort, of actually measured effort of heart rate and respiratory, and making sure that you're actually stressing your system so that you're getting that benefit. And that is really the key. You have to perceive that you are getting an effort, but it doesn't have to be over a very long time.
And the numbers that I come back to, you said the 4% of your exercise, which is really just a couple minutes a day. And I hate doing traditional high intensity intervals. I hate it. It's not fun for me. Some people enjoy it. I hate it. But the thought that I can just keep my eyes open during my day, and it's like, oh, I'm on the third floor of the parking lot. All right, I could trudge my way up with my cell phone, talking to my wife, and not really, get much vigorous exercise. Or I could say, wait a second, I got to walk up those 4 flights anyways. I might as well take it 2 steps at a time, get a bit short of breath as I'm doing it. And it turns out a couple of minutes a day is great. So I was, again, it's an observational study with all the limitations that we've talked about already. But I was very gratified that you don't have to do anything formal. And again, if you want to be a competitive athlete, yeah, you're stuck doing that stuff. But for average folks, don't beat yourself up. Find these things that are really a lot more fun and go do them.
I think that I take this with a big grain of salt. I think that yes, if you're not doing a whole lot, then yeah, going up the stairs, that's something. But if you are being intentional about your training in any way, I mean, even if you're just exercising, you're training, I don't know, maybe you just do 5Ks with your kids, your grandkids. Maybe you just like to be able to be active with whomever, your friends. If you want to be a little more purposeful about high intensity intervals, I think you need to formalize it just a little bit, but it doesn't have to be mundane. It doesn't have to be crazy. The reality is like you said, you don't like them. I actually love them. I feel like they make me push myself in ways that I can't otherwise and in ways that I don't usually. And when I finish a high interval session and I've been successful, it is incredibly rewarding. And the endorphin rush I get from them is really, really positive. So I encourage people to consider making them a part of, and you don't have to do them often. Once a week is really all you should be doing because they do take a toll on you physiologically and you do need to recover from them. And I do want to emphasize, and this is very important, if you are somebody who does not train regularly and you want to incorporate formal interval, high intensity interval work, please make sure that you're prepared for it physically. If you have any pre-existing conditions, you probably want to talk to your doctor and make sure that this is safe for you, because you do need to elevate your heart rate. You do need to elevate your blood pressure. Some medications may prevent you from being able to do that. So it's the kind of thing that if you have pre-existing health issues, you want to talk to your doctor before you embark upon this. But if you're otherwise fit and healthy and this is something you're interested in, I urge you to try it, because I think it really makes a big difference.
Well, my dear listeners, you have the Bobby approach, the less formal one, and Jeff's more rigorous approach, which he loves and enjoys, which is great for him. And you guys can decide.
It's the coach in me.
Beneficial. Yeah, they're both beneficial. You guys can decide what works for you and give me feedback. Just send me a note and I'll share it with Jeff, and I'll let you guys know what comes in through the comments. Okay, now we're on to the third rule we get to break. Let's break the bottle rule. So rule number 3 is that exercise requires a hydration and fueling plan. So the third rule is about what we drink and eat around exercise. Everywhere you turn, there are water bottles, electrolyte packets, sports drinks, gels, chews, pre-workout drink, recovery drink. Plenty of folks selling lots of stuff. Now, for endurance athletes like Jeff coaches, this matters a lot. A long ride, a hot weather ride, or a 6 to 15 hour race is a lot different than a 40-minute gym workout. And as we'll get into, for most exercise under an hour, we may be solving a problem we don't have. Using Voltaire's language, the great might be a carefully calculated hydration and fueling plan. The good might be doing the workout, drinking only if you feel thirsty, and moving on with your day. So where did the strong belief in sports drinks come from? Rationale number 1. If you sweat a bunch, we need to replace those fluids during a workout. So the first hydration idea sounds obvious. If I'm sweating, I must need to replace those fluids during the workout. Now, sometimes that's true. If you're exercising for a long time or in the heat and you sweat a lot, fluid loss can affect performance and safety. But for most exercise under an hour, the key question is not whether you sweat. The key question is, did you lose enough fluid for it to matter? A common sports medicine threshold is about 2% body weight loss when fluid deficit starts to make a difference. Now, it's not a magic line, but it's often used as the point where dehydration becomes more relevant for performance, especially during long exercise or exercise in the heat. So for a 160-pound person, 2% is about 3 pounds. Since 1 pound of sweat loss is roughly 16 ounces of fluid, that would be about 50 ounces or around 1.5 quarts. That's a lot of sweat to have happen in under an hour. So, Jeff, does it make sense for folks who think they need fluids to actually test it out? How could they test whether their reliance on drinking a bottle is actually necessary for them?
Well, I mean, most people who are doing a standard gym workout, 30 to 60 minutes, they probably not losing that much. And if they are losing fluids, which they probably are if they're working to any degree of intensity, replacing it during that workout is just not going to be that important. It's not going to affect anything. And I'll give you a great example. I swim regularly, 2 to 3 times a week for an hour at a time. And I guarantee you I'm sweating when I swim because the water's warm and I'm sweating. You don't perceive it because the sweat is immediately removed into the pool. I don't drink anything during that hour. I get out of the pool and I'll drink afterwards, and I'm none the worse for wear. And I would wager that I'm probably sweating more than a lot of people do when they're doing their average gym workout because I know that I sweat heavily. So it's a great example that I use to remind people that you can do a workout for an hour and not take in any fuel, any fluids, and you're going to be just fine. The issue, though, I think, is keeping in mind what's your status before you start. If you're going into a workout underfueled or dehydrated, that's a different situation. And so I always caution people, make sure that you're appropriately fueled and hydrated when you start a workout, and then you won't have this issue, especially if you're working out for 30 to 40 minutes. But if you want to test it out just the way you were asking, Bobby, the best way to do that is just to do a plain old weigh yourself test. Start off by weighing yourself dry. So before you do your workout, you want to do this with as little clothing on as possible, maybe a pair of underwear, something like that. And then go do your workout. And then after the workout, come back and weigh yourself again wearing exactly the same clothes. And hopefully as minimal as possible. So like a pair of underwear or whatever it is. And that difference is going to be the amount of sweat that you lost and will be the amount of weight that you lost. And in fact, I do this with my athletes to get them an average sweat rate based on when they're doing high intensity biking or running, so that we have a sense of how much fluid they need to replace over the course of a long distance event. But if you're doing this to find out how much you sweat over 30 to 40 minutes, you will find that you're probably not losing that much. And you definitely don't need to worry about replacing it in an ongoing fashion in a short workout like that.
Lovely. So we're going to bring data to the question, and folks can determine whether they need their fluids. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that when I used to work out in my 20s, nobody carried around a water bottle. Yeah, maybe there was a drinking fountain in the gym, but nobody did. Nowadays, everybody's tethered to a water bottle, not just at the gym, but they carry it around all day long. And I do have a podcast episode if people want to re-listen to it. 8 glasses of water a day. Good guidance or an urban myth? Surprise, surprise, it's an urban myth. Your kidneys know what to do. If you're not thirsty, don't worry about it. Okay, let's move from fluids to rationale number 2 for having our sports bottle, electrolytes. And really, the electrolytes are the same issue. So like fluids, electrolytes matter when you lose a bunch. Long exercise, heavy sweating, heat, humidity, repeated sessions, or in people who lose a lot of salt in their sweat. But for a typical short workout, people don't run out of salt in their bodies, especially, again, if you're only losing a pound or 2 of sweat, you're not losing enough electrolytes to worry about it. And for most Americans, we get more than enough salt in our diet. So, Jeff, what do you tell your athletes about electrolytes? Do they need to put stuff in their water bottles or spend money upon the latest electrolyte cocktail? What do you think?
Yeah, so in general, this is such a widely misunderstood topic, and it comes back to when marathon running really became popular. people understood that hydration was a big factor in being successful. They would run their marathon. They would find out if they didn't take fluids in, they would suffer and they would just not be able to finish. And as marathon running became more and more popular, you started seeing these water stations pop up along the course, and people would drink lots of water. And what would happen is as they were sweating, they were losing water and sodium, and they would replace it with free water, and they would dilute the sodium in their bloodstream, and they would get what's called hyponatremia, or low sodium. And that would result in them having very serious health problems. They could become comatose. They could have all kinds of issues. And people died from this water intoxication, essentially, because they were getting hyponatremic. And over time, people came to realize that when we have a profuse amount of fluid loss from sweat, we need to replace not just water, but we need to replace these electrolytes. And so we started to see these balanced electrolyte solutions come into play, and over time, safety was restored, and we don't see these kinds of issues anymore because people are drinking water and they're also getting some sodium, which is very helpful, again, in longer events where you're sweating a lot. But that has now filtered into like everything. Like now it seems like I'm going for a walk. I better take my electrolyte solution because who knows how much sodium I'm going to lose when I'm walking. And we see it promoted continuously. I see this stuff all the time. Liquid IV and I see people at my races, they're carrying baggies of like salt tablets, and they're taking so much salt that we're now getting the reverse. People are now getting hypernatremic because they're taking so much salt that they're overwhelming their kidneys' ability to dilute it, and they can't hold on to enough water, and so they end up with elevated levels of sodium. And so it's become completely ridiculous. And so the reality is you don't need to, if you're doing what I do, these long distance events, you don't need to take in nearly as much salt as you think. You definitely need to take some, but you don't need to take nearly as much as people are making you think you do. And if you're doing these 30 or 40-minute workouts, you don't need to take any. Zero. Just drink water.
Exactly.
If you want to drink Gatorade because you enjoy Gatorade, fine. I'm not going to stop you. But I'll tell you right now, there's more sugar in Gatorade than there is salt. And if you're drinking the sugar-free stuff, that's fine. There's still not a lot of salt. But that's okay. If you prefer having flavored drink, then by all means, go for it. But you know what? There are other ones that you can get that taste just as good, cost less, and have equally piddly amounts of salt in them. So, but like I said, I don't begrudge people who want to drink these things. Just understand that when you take excess electrolytes for a 40-minute workout, all you're doing is peeing it out. Because like you said earlier, Bobby, your kidneys are going to know what to do with, because our whole system is designed to maintain what's called homeostasis, normal kind of like this level, keep everything at the same level all the time. And so a second you take in excess electrolytes, your kidneys are just spitting it all out. So all that money you spend on that stuff is just expensive pee.
Absolutely. Well put. We were going to chat a little bit about the sugar, the Gatorade, but I think we'll do that another time to keep this to a manageable length. Again, if the punchline is, if you're doing a 3-hour marathon, 5-hour marathon, long time out in the sun, sweating, exercising, yeah, having electrolytes, having Gatorade, having some sugar in there is a great idea. But for your 30 or 40-minute workout, save the money and save the calories. Okay, it's time to wrap up. Let's return to Voltaire. The great can become the enemy of the good. Now, in exercise, great often looks like a perfect plan, a perfect weekly schedule, a perfect interval session, a perfect hydration strategy, the perfect fueling plan. But the evidence says something different. It gives us permission to be more flexible. If weekdays are impossible, happily exercise on the weekend. If formal intervals are not happening, use short bursts of effort when daily life offers them to you. And if your workout's under an hour, don't let hydration hype distract you from the exercise itself. The goal is not perfect exercise. The goal is exercise that happens often enough, sometimes hard enough, in a way that fits your real life. The workout that counts is not the perfect one you imagine. It's the good enough one you actually do. Jeff, thank you for your wisdom and guidance. Folks, do check out his TriDoc podcast. And if you want individual endurance training coaching, Jeff, how are folks going to find you?
Oh, I would love if they would reach out. They can email me at tri_doc@icloud.com, or they can give me a follow on Instagram at TriDocCoaching, all one word.
Wonderful. Well, it's been great fun. And I think now that we've talked about exercise, it's time for me to take my afternoon nap and just recover from it all. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks so much for having me.